A lot of people would talk about Nafisa not playing, but I think they're really good without her. They're just a really great basketball team. So I think it was a.
The roar inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse was deafening. A sound that shook the rafters and sent chills down the spines of everyone in attendance. It wasn't just another regular season finale. It felt like a statement, a reckoning, and perhaps even a prophecy for what was to come. The Indiana Fever had been counted out, laughed at, and written off so many times this season that most analysts didn't even bother discussing them as serious playoff threats anymore. Yet here they were, standing tall against the mighty Minnesota Lynx, the team widely regarded as the measuring stick of the WNBA. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The emotions couldn't have been rawer, and the storyline couldn't have been more dramatic. The Fever weren't just playing for a win. They were playing to rewrite the narrative of an entire franchise, to prove that even when fate rips away your stars and shatters your rotations, heart, grit, and unrelenting determination can still carve out a path to glory. And at the center of this storm stood a team that had been forged through pain, bonded by adversity, and driven by a belief that no amount of injuries, bad whistles, or disrespect could keep them from their destiny. This was more than basketball. It was survival, redemption, and a message to the entire league that Indiana was done being the underdog no one took seriously. The road to this moment had been anything but easy. At the start of the season, there was optimism radiating throughout Indiana, with rookie sensation Caitlin Clark lighting up the league and bringing a wave of national attention. The Fever looked poised to turn years of frustration into something special. Clark's arrival wasn't just a roster addition. It was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, Indiana games were sellouts. Their highlights dominated social media. And a fan base that had endured nearly a decade of mediocrity could finally dream again. Early in the season, Clark's dazzling playmaking deep three-pointers and fiery competitiveness made it seem like anything was possible. But then, like a cruel twist of fate, the injuries began to pile up. First, it was Sydney Colson who tore her ACL in what initially seemed like a minor stumble during practice. Then came Sophie Cunningham, whose MCL tear sidelined her at a crucial stretch. Ari McDonald fractured her foot. Chloe Beebe-Wise's knee simply wouldn't hold up under the nightly grind. One by one, key players fell, and the Fever's rotation began to crumble like a house of cards in a storm. The list of sideline talent was staggering. An entire lineup's worth of players who could have been a formidable starting five were now confined to street clothes and medical reports. And then came the news that felt like a dagger to the heart of Indiana's season. Caitlin Clark's groin injury, which had been described as nagging for weeks, was now officially season-ending. The announcement didn't just sting. It devastated an entire fan base. Clark wasn't merely a star. She was the heartbeat of the team, the reason national audiences tuned in, the spark that lit up every arena she stepped into. Losing her wasn't just about losing points and assists, it was about losing hope. When the press release dropped, you could feel the collective gut punch from Indiana to Iowa and beyond. The franchise that had finally climbed back into the national conversation suddenly faced the terrifying possibility of free-falling back into irrelevance. The players were gutted, the coaches were scrambling to rework strategies on the fly, and fans were left wondering if this was the end of their dream before it had even truly begun. Yet, amid the despair, a spark ignited. Instead of folding, the Fever decided to fight. That fight began with Kelsey Mitchell, a veteran who had spent years carrying this franchise through the dark days. Mitchell didn't just step up. She ascended to a level few saw coming. Night after night, she poured in over 20 points, often against double teams, while handling the bulk of the playmaking duties. Opponents knew she was the focal point, yet they couldn't stop her. She didn't just score, she willed the team forward with every explosive drive, every clutch jumper, every fiery huddle speech. By season's end, Mitchell had shattered franchise records, surpassing even the legendary Tamika Catchings in single-season scoring numbers. Her brilliance wasn't born from ideal circumstances. It was forged in chaos. with defenses scheming entirely to stop her. Mitchell still found ways to carve them apart, proving herself not just as a scorer, but as the beating heart of Indiana's late-season surge. Beside her stood Aaliyah Boston, the young star whose presence in the paint provided the anchor Indiana desperately needed. While Mitchell dazzled on the perimeter, Boston did the dirty work inside, muscling for rebounds, protecting the rim, and delivering reliable scoring night after night. Over the final 10 games, she averaged a steady 15 points and more than 8 rebounds, setting a new franchise record for single-season boards. Her toughness was a stabilizing force, the glue that held together a team constantly adjusting to new lineups. When possessions broke down, when opponents tried to bully Indiana physically, Boston was there to restore order. Her impact didn't always show up in highlight reels, but to anyone watching closely, weave that without her, the Fever's defense would have completely unraveled. Still, the question loomed large. Could this battered patchwork roster really dream of making the playoffs? Logic screamed no. Every rational basketball mind said this team was too depleted, too inexperienced, too reliant on sheer willpower to survive. But the Fever defied logic. They turned every slight, every injury, every bad call into fuel. Bench players who were once afterthoughts started putting up double-digit nights. Hardship signings like Odyssey Sims came in and made immediate, game-changing impacts. The team's culture shifted. Instead of seeing themselves as victims of bad luck, they embraced the challenge and decided to rewrite the script. It was as if the basketball gods had thrown every obstacle their way just to see if they'd break, and Indiana refused to bend. That resilience was on full display when they faced the Minnesota Lynx, a team that had been their tormentor earlier in the season. In a previous meeting, Minnesota not only defeated Indiana, but left them humiliated in more ways than one. During that game, a particularly ugly moment unfolded when Kayla McBride's elbow caught Lexie Hull square in the face. Blood spilled, tensions flared, and yet somehow, in a stunning display of officiating incompetence, Hull was the one slapped with a technical foul while McBride skated free. The incident became a symbol of Indiana's perceived lack of respect within the league. A team constantly on the receiving end of questionable calls and unfair treatment. Fever fans were furious, and Hull herself was left not only physically hurt but emotionally seething. So when the schedule brought Minnesota back into Indiana's house for the final game of the regular season, the narrative was already electric before the ball even tipped. This wasn't just another game. It was personal. For Hull, it was a chance at redemption. For the Fever, it was an opportunity to announce to the league that they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The crowd could feel the weight of it. Every fan in attendance knew what was at stake, and when the game began, the Fever responded with an opening run that sent shockwaves through the building. A blistering 10-0 start forced Minnesota into an early timeout. And from that moment, it was clear this night would be different. Indiana wasn't here to play catch-up. They were here to dominate. By halftime, the Fever had built a commanding double-digit lead, powered by suffocating defense and efficient offense. Minnesota, usually a sharpshooting machine, couldn't buy a bucket from beyond the arc, hitting just 2 of 23-point attempts. Every miss seemed to sap their confidence while Indiana's energy only grew. Role players stepped up in monumental ways. Odyssey Sims, once viewed as a mere stopgap signing, poured in 15 points off the bench, playing with the hunger of someone fighting to prove they still belonged in the league. Aerial Powers delivered back-to-back clutch threes in the second half that swung momentum decisively back to Indiana whenever Minnesota threatened to come back. It wasn't just scoring, it was defiance. The statement that no matter how depleted they were, the Fever would not be intimidated. As the game clock wound down, the reality began to set in. This wasn't merely a regular season win. It was a franchise-altering moment. The Fever had secured their 3rd straight victory, finished the season with a 24-20 record, their first winning record since 2015, and entered the playoffs with a wave of momentum no one could have predicted. 9 years of frustration, false starts, and rebuilds had culminated in this night. And the fans who had stuck by the team through it all erupted in joy. And while Caitlin Clark couldn't suit up, she was very much a part of the moment. Cameras caught her animatedly signaling plays from the bench, barking out instructions, and even joking with referees. It was as if she had seamlessly transitioned into a coaching role, guiding her teammates from the sidelines and proving that her leadership transcended the court. But amidst all the chaos, one individual moment rose above the rest. A single play that encapsulated everything Indiana had endured and overcome. It came courtesy of Lexie Hull, and it was poetic in its execution. Early in the second quarter, Hull found herself one-on-one with Kayla McBride at the top of the key, with a quick dribble to her left and a hesitation move that froze McBride. Hull crossed back over, sending McBride stumbling to the. The air was electric, thick with anticipation. As the Indiana Fever stepped off their home court for the final time before the playoffs, the echo of their 83-72 statement win over the top-seeded Minnesota Lynx still reverberated through the arena. But now, an even bigger challenge loomed ahead. This was no longer about regular season wins, moral victories, or proving doubters wrong for a night. This was about survival at the highest level, the playoffs. And for a team that had been stitched together through injuries, hardship, contracts, and sheer willpower. The idea of marching into the postseason without Caitlin Clark might have seemed like a death sentence to outsiders. But to the Fever themselves, it was a battle cry. Their mindset had shifted entirely over the past few weeks. What began as a season of cautious optimism had transformed into a crusade fueled by defiance and unbreakable unity. Every setback had been internalized, every insult absorbed, every piece of doubt turned into ammunition. Now, they weren't just playing to compete. They were playing to shock the world and force it to finally respect them. Indiana's journey to this point was a masterclass in resilience. When Caitlin Clark went down with her season-ending groin injury, there was an audible gasp across the WNBA landscape. Clark wasn't just another rookie, she was the rookie. It's the face of the league's next generation. The reason arenas were sold out and national broadcasters were finally paying attention. Her absence didn't just leave a statistical void, it left an emotional crater. Analysts across the country declared the Fever's playoff hopes dead on arrival. Social media filled with memes and takes about how Indiana was finished without their star. Even opposing teams, whether they said it publicly or not, assumed the Fever would fold. In sports, perception often becomes reality, and the narrative swirling around Indiana was suffocating. But here's what everyone underestimated. The Fever's locker room wasn't built on hype. It wasn't built on just one player, no matter how talented she was. This team had been through years of futility and frustration. They had seen coaches come and go, draft picks flame out, and rebuilds collapse. When Clark arrived, she brought attention. Yes, but the foundation of grit had already been laid by veterans like Kelsey Mitchell. Losing Clark hurt deeply, but it didn't destroy them, it galvanized them. In private meetings, practices, and film sessions, the message was clear. We will not be a pity story. Head coach Christy Sides, known for her no-nonsense demeanor, hammered home a mantra that would define their stretch run. We fight with what we've got. That mentality seeped into every player's psyche, from the starters down to the hardship signees, who weren't even on the roster a month earlier. Kelsey Mitchell became the embodiment of that fight. For years, Mitchell had been overlooked nationally, dismissed as a high-volume scorer on bad teams. But with Clark sidelined, Mitchell's true brilliance was finally given the stage it deserved. She didn't just play well, she played like a superstar. Her scoring explosions weren't empty stats. They were lifelines keeping Indiana afloat. Game after game, defenses threw double teams, traps, and junk coverages at her, yet she still found ways to get buckets. What made her run even more remarkable was her leadership growth. She wasn't just putting up points, she was orchestrating the offense, mentoring younger teammates, and setting the emotional tone. In the locker room, she was vocal and demanding. On the court, she was fearless. By season's end, she had done more than lead Indiana to the playoffs. She had permanently changed how the league viewed her place among its elite guards. Aaliyah Boston, meanwhile, anchored the team with a quiet, relentless presence. While Mitchell's contributions were loud and visible, Boston's were the steady heartbeat beneath it all. The young center had every reason to wilt under the pressure, double-teamed in the post. Tasked with guarding elite bigs, forced to play extended minutes due to injuries. Instead, she rose higher. Her rebounding numbers skyrocketed. Her rim protection suffocated opposing offenses. And her offensive game blossomed in key moments. Over her last 10 games, Boston didn't just play well. She dominated physically, breaking the Fever's single-season rebounding record in the process. Teammates began referring to her as the anchor, because no matter how chaotic things became, Boston's presence gave them stability. In a league where paint dominance often determines playoff success, her emergence was a game changer. The supporting cast, often overlooked, became heroes in their own right. Odyssey Sims, who had been signed mid-season as a hardship player, turned back the clock with gutsy performances off the bench. She wasn't just a stopgap, she was a spark plug. Springing, scoring, playmaking, and veteran savvy exactly when Indiana needed it most. Aerial powers added timely shooting and emotional fire, including those back-to-back threes against Minnesota that essentially sealed the game. Natasha Howard provided versatility, guarding multiple positions and filling statistical gaps wherever needed. Even players like Lexie Hull, thrust into roles they hadn't anticipated, rose to the challenge. Hull's story, in particular, captured fans' hearts because it mirrored the team's journey. Just weeks earlier, she had been the victim of that infamous Kayla McBride elbow incident. The sight of Hull bleeding while being incorrectly penalized by referees became a rallying point for Fever supporters who felt their team was constantly disrespected. When Indiana faced Minnesota again, all eyes were on Hull to see how she would respond. Her now viral crossover that sent McBride tumbling wasn't just a highlight. It was a cathartic release for everyone who had witnessed the earlier injustice. In that moment, Hull wasn't just avenging herself. She was avenging her entire team's season of slights and setbacks. This collective rise from the supporting cast fundamentally altered Indiana's trajectory. Instead of collapsing under the weight of injuries, they embraced a next woman up mentality. Bench players became starters, hardship signees became difference makers. And the locker room's chemistry reached unprecedented levels. The Fever began to view their misfortunes not as excuses but as challenges to be conquered. Practices grew more intense, film sessions more detailed, and the team's defensive efforts skyrocketed. By the time they reeled off 3 straight wins to close the regular season, including that stunning takedown of Minnesota, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The victory over the Lynx was symbolic on multiple levels. Minnesota had been the WNBA standard-bearer all year, boasting depth, talent, and championship pedigree. Beating them wasn't just about climbing the standings. It was about proving Indiana belonged among the league's elite. From the opening tip, the Fever played with a swagger that hadn't been seen in years. Their 10-0 opening run wasn't luck, it was a product of preparation and belief. Defensively, they hounded Minnesota into one of their worst shooting nights of the season, holding them to an abysmal 2-for-1 from three-point range. Offensively, they executed with precision, hitting clutch shots and taking care of the ball. The game wasn't just a win. It was a message broadcast loud and clear to every playoff team watching. Indiana is coming. And they are not to be underestimated. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this transformation was Caitlin Clark's role from the sidelines. Despite being sidelined with her injury, Clark remained deeply involved. Cameras caught her signaling plays, calling out defensive coverages, and even pulling teammates aside for mid-game strategy talks. She wasn't just cheering, she was coaching. Her leadership didn't fade when she put on street clothes. If anything, it intensified. Teammates often referred to her as Coach Caitlin during this stretch. And her presence provided a psychological boost that can't be quantified in stats. It also sent a powerful message to fans, even though her rookie season ended prematurely. Her impact on the franchise was just beginning. For the Fever faithful, the emotional stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about reclaiming pride after years of irrelevance. It was about proving that women's sports deserve the same respect and attention as any other. It was about showing young fans across Indiana that resilience matters more than circumstances. When the team finished with a 24-20 record, marking their first winning season since 2015, it felt like the culmination of nearly a decade's worth of struggle. The crowd that had stuck with them through losing streaks and heartbreak finally had a reason to believe again. As Indiana now turns its gaze to the playoffs, their mindset is clear. They are no longer content to just be a feel-good story. They want to win, to advance, to force their doubters to confront the reality that this team is for real. Their potential first-round opponents are already studying tape. But how do you game plan for a team that thrives on chaos? Indiana's unpredictability is their greatest weapon. With multiple players capable of stepping up on any given night and a defense that suffocates opponents when engaged, the Fever have the blueprint to shock higher seeds. Yet, for all the tactical talk, the true driving force remains emotional. Every player in that locker room carries the weight of what this season has